A country with more oil than almost anywhere on Earth just ran out of gas. Not in one city, not in one region, in all 83 of them, simultaneously. Picture this. You wake up, get in your car, and drive to the nearest gas station. There's a line. Fine. You wait. An hour passes. Then 2. Then 6. The sun sets. You're still there. You sleep in your seat. You wake up again. Still no fuel. That is not a scene from Soviet 1991. That is Russia. Right now. This week. In the Siberian city of Chita, drivers were documented waiting behind the wheel for a full 36 hours just to reach a pump, only to be told the station had already run dry. Traffic police stood guard at the line not to speed things up, but to stop people from cutting, because drivers who had been there for days were ready to explode, and in many cases they did. In the Chelyabinsk region, a 26-year-old driver ignored warnings, bypassed the queue, and attacked another motorist so severely the victim was hospitalized. In the Siberian town of Ust-Ilimsk, police officers drew their service weapons to suppress a riot after a luxury car pulled straight to the front of a line of dozens of desperate drivers. In Ufa, tear gas was deployed at a gas station brawl so violent that people's clothing was literally torn from their bodies. This is not a fuel shortage. This is a country coming apart at the seams. If you want to understand the full story behind what's happening inside Russia right now, stories the mainstream news cycle barely has time to unpack, consider subscribing. We go deep so you don't have to. To understand why 140 million Russians are suddenly fighting over fuel, you need to understand one number: 42.7%. That is the percentage of Russia's entire refined oil processing capacity that was knocked offline at its peak, not by sanctions, not by mismanagement, but by Ukrainian drones. Since the beginning of 2026 alone, Ukraine's armed forces have conducted 194 precision strikes on Russian oil infrastructure in just the first 6 months of the year, part of a total campaign exceeding 300 strikes since the war began. These were not symbolic attacks. They were surgical, guided by AI-powered targeting systems capable of threading through Russia's dense electronic warfare jamming shields. Ukrainian kamikaze drones flew thousands of miles hugging river corridors and low-altitude flight paths, and they dove straight into the most sensitive point of every refinery they hit, the distillation towers. Every single one of Russia's 11 largest oil refineries was struck, from the Omsk facility, the country's largest, buried deep in Siberia, to the Kapotnya refinery sitting on Moscow's own southeastern edge, from Ryazan to Nizhny Novgorod. From the Black Sea refineries at Ilsky, Afipsky, and Tuapse in the south, to the Volga Basin storage hubs at Saratov and Syzran. Massive fireballs, black smoke columns visible for days. And then, silence. The machinery stopped. Russia's daily oil refining volume collapsed to 3.91 million barrels, a 21-year low. That is a loss of more than 1.4 million barrels per day compared to the same period last year. And when refining stops, everything that depends on fuel, which is everything, starts to die. The fuel crisis did not stay at gas stations. It metastasized, fast, into every artery of Russian life. Transportation. Taxi operators in major cities cut operations by 20%. Drivers began refusing long-distance trips, terrified of being stranded mid-route with no refueling option. Transit fares in Moscow and St. Petersburg nearly doubled almost overnight as available vehicles became scarce. Municipal buses couldn't complete their routes. Ambulances and fire trucks were restricted to designated emergency-only fuel reserves, rationed like wartime medicine. Agriculture. July and August are Russia's critical wheat harvest months. Russia is one of the world's top 3 grain exporters. This year, combine harvesters sat idle in open fields, tanks empty, diesel nowhere to be found. Logistics trucks that should have been moving harvested grain to silos and ports shut their engines off in storage lots and didn't restart. An agricultural nation watching its harvest rot in fields because it can't fuel its own tractors. The downstream consequences of that extend well beyond Russia's borders, into global grain markets that are already fragile. Logistics. Heavy freight trucks servicing Siberian industrial corridors were stranded for days in remote locations, unable to find a single drop of diesel. Rail transport, on non-electrified branch lines dependent on diesel locomotives, entered a raw material bottleneck that began choking factory production lines. Household waste went uncollected for weeks in Siberian suburbs and mid-sized towns, piling into mountains on street corners, creating the early conditions of a public health emergency. And then came the moment that went viral across Russian social media and encapsulated everything. A courier delivering packages on horseback. Not a stunt, not a joke. A real logistics worker, unable to fuel his vehicle, reverting to the most pre-industrial solution available. Demand for horses and pack animals in rural areas exploded so fast that horse breeders reported being unable to fill orders. Bicycle sales surged 131% in a single month, as city couriers, restaurant delivery workers, and grocery distributors locked their scooters and motorcycles in garages and switched to cargo bikes. Russia, the world's largest country by landmass, a nation that spans 11 time zones, was being forced backward in time. When official supply collapses, unofficial supply fills the gap, at a price. A Soviet-era style black market for fuel quietly organized itself across Russia with startling speed, primarily through telegram channels and classified ad platforms like Avito. Particularly active in and around Crimea, these networks operated like underground logistics companies, delivering privately sourced fuel in jerry cans loaded into taxi trunks, right to customers' doors, at prices that could exceed the official rate by 50% or more. Russian citizens began building backyard mini gas stations. Security forces in Rostov dismantled an illegal mobile fuel ring that had stockpiled 4.5 metric tons of gasoline and was selling it directly to locals at extortionate prices. Meanwhile, those who couldn't afford black market prices, or who lived near enough to a border, took a different route, literally. Drivers undertook long cross-border journeys into Kazakhstan and China just to fill their tanks. A phenomenon so widespread it earned its own term in Russian media, fuel tourism. And for those who stayed in line at official stations, the government had one more insult waiting. A downgrade of fuel quality standards from Euro 5 all the way down to Euro 2, low-grade gasoline that corrodes modern engines and emits significantly more pollution. Cars imported from China or via Western parallel imports began experiencing fuel system failures almost immediately. Russia wasn't just running out of fuel, it was running out of good fuel and destroying the vehicles that remained. Vladimir Putin built his political legitimacy on a simple, unspoken contract with the Russian people. Stay out of politics, and we'll keep your life comfortable and stable. Fuel is not an abstract political concept. Fuel is what gets your child to school. It is what keeps the bakery running, what keeps the heat on, what keeps food moving from farms to shelves. When fuel disappears, visibly, physically, humiliatingly, that contract tears. Polling data released in July by Russia's own independent polling agencies, the Levada Center, VT's IOM, and FOM, showed a sharp plunge in public support for Putin. Russia's consumer sentiment index dropped 23 points over the past year, hitting 94, the most pessimistic economic expectation recorded since October 2022, the darkest period of the first year of the full-scale invasion. Remarkably, even Russia's most prominent pro-war military bloggers, figures who built their audiences cheerleading Kremlin operations, began publicly admitting the system had failed. Military commentator Yefim Golman openly conceded that Ukraine's targeting of energy and logistics infrastructure was strategically sound, an extraordinary admission from someone whose audience expects unwavering support for the Russian military. Public anger has crossed into territory that would have been unimaginable 2 years ago. Russian citizens have openly called for the permanent removal of the current leadership. Some have publicly wished for Putin to contract a fatal illness and die. These are not fringe voices whispering in private. These are citizens on social media live streams, broadcasting from inside fuel lines, in real time, to audiences of thousands. The Kremlin's response? Summon Cossack militia patrols to guard gas stations, deploy tear gas, draw weapons, and ban fuel exports entirely for the first time in Russian history. A complete jet fuel export ban through November 30, 2026, extended gasoline export bans, and emergency discussions about halting diesel exports as well. A nation that built its entire global identity as an energy superpower is now too fuel-starved to export any. The financial bleeding is severe. Since August 2025, the accumulated damage to Russia's refining sector has torn a $13.5 billion hole in the Kremlin's budget. money that was earmarked to finance the war. And because the Western sanctions blocking high-tech spare parts for catalytic cracking and distillation units remain fully in force, Russia cannot simply repair what Ukraine has destroyed. The companies that built and maintained these systems, Western industrial automation and control software firms, have exited the Russian market entirely. China and domestic alternatives exist, but they compromise the structural integrity of already damaged facilities. Engineers are now engaged in what analysts are calling industrial cannibalization, stripping functional parts from dead refineries to keep damaged ones limping along. This strategy generates thermal fatigue in the steel structures and leaves facilities permanently vulnerable to internal failure, even without further drone strikes. The IEA now projects that Russia's total oil production will decline an additional 3% by year-end, reaching 8.9 million barrels per day, with the refining contraction hardening into a permanent structural problem, not a temporary crisis. In a move that illustrates just how inverted the situation has become, Russia, which sells cheap crude oil to Indian refineries, is now buying back the processed gasoline at twice the price via seaborne tankers crossing thousands of nautical miles from Indian ports to Black Sea and Baltic terminals, before trucking it inland via rail. It is importing the product of its own oil, at a loss, from a country it was supposed to be supplying. Emergency negotiations are also underway with Kazakhstan for monthly deliveries of AI-92-grade gasoline framed diplomatically as humanitarian aid, a framing that reveals the depth of Moscow's desperation. Even Kazakhstan, one of Russia's closest nominal allies, is reportedly dragging its feet, unwilling to drain its own domestic market for Moscow's benefit. On the night of July 18, 2026, Ukraine executed what may be its most strategically significant single operation of the war, not on the front line, but 50 kilometers from the Kremlin. Ukrainian drones struck the largest distribution center belonging to Wildberries, Russia's answer to Amazon, in the city of Elektrostal, east of Moscow. The strike caused material destruction estimated at over $1 billion. The facility reportedly stored not only civilian e-commerce inventory, but also military drone components, optical sensors, microchips, and dual-use tactical equipment being funneled to the front line through parallel import networks. Insurance payouts were denied. Thousands of metric tons of goods, both civilian and military, burned. That same night, an oil hub east of Moscow, comprising 24 massive storage tanks, the facility that supplied the capital itself with gasoline and diesel, was turned into a fireball. The black smoke rose for days. Visible from the suburbs of Moscow, a cinematic image of energy insecurity inside the empire's own capital. And then came the detail that perhaps best captures the state of Russian military preparedness. In Kotovsk, a Russian Pantsir air defense system, the very system tasked with defending the region, apparently lost targeting control and fired 30mm cannon rounds into a local Wildberries distribution facility itself. Russia's air defense accidentally striking Russian infrastructure in Russia. Ukrainian President Zelensky confirmed operations extending 500 to 700 kilometers behind the front line. Moscow Mayor Sergei Sobyanin acknowledged that more than 1,890 drones had been directed at the capital in a single week, nearly 2,000 unmanned aerial vehicles in 7 days, enough to drive Russia's radar networks, interception systems, and ammunition reserves toward operational exhaustion. The famous layered air defense ring around Moscow, Pantsir S-1 mobile platforms, S-400 missile batteries, built over years at enormous cost, presented to the Russian public as an impenetrable shield, is failing in real time, on live streams, for everyone to see. Ukraine's strategy is now clear, and it's working, not by breaking Russia's army on the front line first, but by breaking Russia's economy, Russia's logistics, Russia's daily life, and ultimately Russia's social contract, from behind the lines. Every refinery hit is a multiplier. It degrades military fuel. It starves civilian transport. It spikes inflation. It triggers public anger. It erodes the regime's myth of stability. The Kremlin now faces a dilemma with no clean answer. Pull air defense batteries from the front lines to protect refineries and expose troops. Leave refineries exposed and watch the domestic economy continue to collapse. There is no third option. As winter approaches, and Russia's heating fuel demands spike, the pressure on an already broken refining system will intensify further. The informal contract between the Russian state and Russian people, the "we'll leave you alone if you leave us alone" bargain that sustained Putin's grip for 2 decades, is fraying openly, in fuel lines, on social media, in polling numbers, in the words of his own supporters. Russia is not running out of oil. Russia is running out of time. So here's the question, and we genuinely want to hear from you. Can Putin stabilize this before winter turns a fuel crisis into a full political crisis? Or is the damage already too deep to paper over, with emergency imports and export bans? Drop your read in the comments below. And if this kind of in-depth, unfiltered coverage is what you come here for, hit subscribe. We cover these stories the way they deserve to be covered. Fully, factually, and without the noise. New video drops soon. Don't miss it.